I'm here to talk about freedom, and I'm very excited about it. Do you remember the first time you realized that you were free? That you were really free? The first time I even knew what freedom was, I got lost in a library, and I was reading stories about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, and freedom was so clear and so easy to understand. And then I grew up, and it got complicated like everything else. And I started to look for freedom in everything I saw. I tried to listen for it. And one day I was driving in the car and I heard on the radio Janis Joplin. And she sang that famous lyric, "Freedom is nothing left to lose." And I thought to myself, is that how I have to experience freedom? Do I have to get to the edge, lose everything, give everything up to really experience freedom? See, freedom had become this esoteric, cerebral idea that I couldn't quite touch. It was like love, right? You can feel it, but you can't touch it. You can't hold it in your hands. And I read this, the great agnostic Robert Greene Ingersoll's. He wrote it beautifully when he said, "What light is to the eyes, what air is to the lungs, what love is to the heart, liberty is to the soul of man." And I thought, this is amazing. I cannot get enough of this freedom stuff, right? And I kept looking for it in everything I did. And so I went to law school. And when other people met their partners, I met the Constitution. And I got to know the Constitution, and I flirted with it, and I tried it on. And I explored the freedom of religion. I tried on the freedom of speech, and my family would say too much. I assembled, I petitioned, I wrote to the press, I even shot a gun. I loved it. I loved everything about freedom. And what I came to find was that freedom in the Constitution was very personal, very intimate, something different than what they had taught me. The Constitution didn't just set up the power of government. It didn't just set up the structure, the architecture of government. It spoke to me personally. It spoke to all of us personally. It was our guardian. It was our bedfellow. But it wasn't until I started teaching at an open enrollment college, where students are anywhere from 15 to 75 years of age and even older, and they come to this sanctuary of sorts. It's where everyone has access to education. It's an amazing idea, right? And it was really through my students that I understood this new emerging idea of freedom and I would come to understand what freedom is now. Let me tell you about my students, because they're absolutely fantastic. They're gritty, they're self-determined, they're intellectually curious, they're self-reliant, they're absolutely beautiful. They also carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. They are husbands, they are wives, they are sons, they are daughters, they are caregivers, and they are seeking education, carrying all that with them. And they come to me, and we start to talk about freedom, and we start to explore the Constitution, and they distance themselves from freedom. And at first, I couldn't quite tell what was happening, and it started to reveal itself that freedom is a few generations away from my students, that hunger for freedom, to what that feels like, and that they also connected freedom with some of the ugliness and divisiveness of modern politics, that they related the two. And so they were shy with freedom. So I introduced them to the Constitution. And they came to understand what I had come to understand, that it was very personal to them, very intimate, and that the Constitution didn't grant them their rights. It gave them a shield. It protected them, and that they had been free all along, and that they didn't have to look that hard. I didn't have to look that hard. You don't have to look that hard for freedom, that it's inside of us. And they came to know that truth that every single person in this room knows, that deep inside of us, each one of us is so magnificent, so valuable, so unique, that we don't need a constitution to give us freedom. We have it as our birthright, not just as Americans, but as the human race. And so as students come to know that freedom and they try that freedom on, they did it in unique and different ways. But they had to come to a realization first, that inherent in freedom is responsibility. That's pretty heavy, especially for these students who are already carrying the weight of the world around. And responsibility has gotten a bad rap. We think of responsibility as this weight, and that somehow what Janis Joplin said, that we got to get rid of all the duties and get rid of all the encumbrances in our lives to really experience freedom. And that's absolutely not true. And any one of us that traffics in responsibility knows that to embrace responsibility is probably the most freeing thing that any one of us can do, because then you can chart your own course, you can set your own sail, you can choose a life that speaks to you. And so students, once they discover their freedom, once they define freedom, they have to embrace responsibility. And that responsibility first means to themselves, to love and respect themselves. And then freedom directs them to respect others, to tolerate and to be kind and to exalt civility. Because freedom, no matter what we define it as, no matter how it comes out, has never meant to be less than those tenets of humanity. And so once they embrace freedom and they feel the responsibility, it leads them to the most amazing places. It leads them to service. And I just want to say that these students know, and I know, that the Constitution is flawed. And it's flawed in its design and its application. But there's a tenderness and grace that it offers each of us. And when you can find your beat of freedom in the Constitution, you can find that intimacy, it leads you to the most amazing places. One night I couldn't sleep and I did what all the literature says not to do. I opened my email in the middle of the night thinking that was going to help me sleep, right? And I received an email from a student I had had a few semesters ago. And the email was both an apology of sorts and a manifesto of sorts. And in the note, he revealed to me that he had not been sober much of my class, but that he was on his 30th day of sobriety, and that he was reconnecting with a son as a man, as a father, and that he was using the one piece of my class that he remembered about freedom to claim his life back, to make his life his own. And I realized it was that unique expression of freedom that was really emerging. It wasn't the stuff of government. It was the stuff that was inside of us. He was taking his freedom and claiming a new life. He was not just breaking the bonds of government, he was breaking the narrative that all of us have of past hurts, past abuses, societal cues, disenfranchisement, whatever comes with us. He was using his intimate relationship with freedom to express himself, to claim his life. But then he ended with a piece that is really the piece that speaks to me. That's really the piece that I want to share with you today. He had used his free will to claim his sobriety. He had used his free will to connect with his son. And then he asked in closing where he could serve others. Where could he dedicate his life? So as exhausted as he was seeking to serve others. And that diversity of freedom is seen in almost all my students. That when they come to find freedom, it could be the artist that seeks to express themselves and celebrate or heal using their art. It could be the entrepreneur that's seeking economic liberty. It comes out in all different ways. But it always leads to the same thing. When we define freedom, however we define it, it embraces responsibility and it leads to service. And that is the transformative nature of the Constitution. And it's a much different story than any one of us have ever been told in civics class. So I see my students when they come in and they define their own freedom for themselves and they embrace responsibility and they serve others in the community and they serve in our community. That freedom of expression adds to a national murmur that we all are listening to right now. That our institutions are gracefully trying to navigate, where we have to take these freedoms that are individual to each of us, and they compete, and we have to figure out how to resolve that conflict. And so those freedoms of expression are meeting that national murmur, and they're coming together, and they're part of this great movement of change that we're all living through. That freedom doesn't just belong in the books, it doesn't just belong in the parades, that it belongs to each of us individually, and that it always drives us to responsibility and always drives us to service, and that is beautiful and transformative. And it's not just an American ideal, it's a universal and shared idea. So next time when we hear the debate about other countries and other individuals seeking their liberties, perhaps we can open ourselves that that's not just the stuff of economic crises, that that is the making of human rights. And I know that we like to see grand gestures of change and that we look for these big pictures of how the world is changing and how freedom should look. But I think that we see the most beautiful expressions of liberty in the quiet, everyday expressions of service, and that those service change the world. And I'm excited and turned on to see where the whispers of the Constitution speak to you, how they reveal your freedom and your service. Thank you.
Could you stay just a second?
Yeah.
So, Tara, I would imagine that you get asked a lot of questions about the Constitution. Do you mind if I ask you a couple?
Of course.
So, I'm wondering, how free are we in America?
This is actually a question that a lot of my students ask because we think we're the barometer of freedom, that we're the gold standard, yeah? But there's a number of indexes that we know of that actually indicate that in terms of economic liberty, which is the basis of a lot of our freedoms, we're actually 12th in the world. And when it comes to civil liberties, those are the liberties that we really like, that we're really close to, we're actually 21st in the world.
Do not have a winner yet.
And that's because this idea of freedom that we're talking about, that we're defining, other countries have picked it up where we started and they ran. And they learn from those weaknesses and those errors of our ways, and they exalt it. So to answer your question, Elizabeth, we are free, but our colleagues in other countries are actually developing freedom in a much different way.
I have one more.
Okay.
One more question for Tara. Does the Supreme Court decision regarding marriage mean that the First Amendment of freedom of religion isn't important?
So you all been watching the news, yeah? We've got a Kentucky clerk that is sitting in jail. And we have a lot of rhetoric, right? About the freedom of religion, that somehow the Constitution belongs to conservatives or belongs to liberals. And what our Supreme Court has said in June is that liberty belongs to you, but that no liberties are above each other, so that the freedom of religion does not trump equality, and one brand of freedom of religion does not trump the other. So I think what we're discovering is that equality is paramount with liberty, right? And that we don't have to compete those liberties, we just have to exalt equality.